So after the bell ringer, once again, if you didn't enter in something, make sure you do. What do you know about China or India? And the first item would be the journal number 1. And it simply says, why do you think China and India are included in the world superpowers unit? Please answer in 3 to 5 sentences and proofread. So why do you think these two countries are included in that? So go ahead and let's just take 10 minutes to do that. If you get done early, you can look at the USW for reading assignment. So if you get done with the journal, please look at the reading assignment next. But now that everybody should be done with the journal, the US4 reading is the third item down on the module page, so make sure that you look at that. The page itself has the EI chart, so if you click on that, please, and make sure that it is working properly and that it makes you a copy. So just make sure that it opens up one for you. There it is. Just go ahead and open up the ER chart, and you can see it's broken up into parts. So the first little table there is for China, and that is the longest of them, and it's for, you're supposed to type in 15 facts and 7 interpretations on the right-hand side. So after you start typing, you should just press enter, and then a second number will appear, and so on. Then India, type the 10 most significant facts in your own words. That's a little bit shorter. Make sure that you follow the page numbers on the link because you don't have to read the entire thing. So it's just those 3 pages that it lists. And then each of the selections about Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, and Libya, and each of those is pretty short. So you only need 5 facts and 2 interpretations for each of those. And we'll have time to work on this now. You can go and get started, and then we'll take notes toward the end of the period. And then every day throughout the week, there'll be time, the second half of the period, where you can work on it too. So go ahead and get started on that. Make sure that you have that ER chart opened up because that's what you'll need to type in to complete the assignment. Once you're done, you'll just upload that. Does anybody have any questions? None? All right. Which you can see underneath the reading. So, of course, if you click on the notes link, you'll see the document. It should make a copy automatically. Might take a few seconds. And it should look something like this. So you can type in your name, of course, and the date, which is February the 22nd. And of course, this is unit number 4. And the topic is world powers. World superpowers, I guess. And so the first place that we'll look at would be China. We'll cover a lot on China, so actually we'll talk a little bit about it today and a little bit about it tomorrow as well. Oops. There you can see a map of China. As someone pointed out in the bell ringer, fourth largest country in the world, making up most of East Asia. Massive geographically. Of course, as a topographical map, you can see a huge portion of Western China is made up of mountains. And of course, the kind that are here along the border of some of these other countries are the Himalayan mountains, the tallest and one of the youngest mountain formations in the world. And China is not exactly as simple as one country existing all the time, even though we say Chinese civilization has gone on for thousands of years, because actually there are many different peoples that make up modern day China that were conquered in the past. And so, just like some of the other countries that we talked about before, Afghanistan and my brain just froze, so we'll just say Afghanistan. And these countries go through phases as they build up through their history where they're actually conquered by quite a few different people. And most of China's history has been formed because of geographic features such as mountains and rivers, like any other place. But they've also had quite a bit of philosophy and history that's occurred throughout the years. And they have, for a lack of a better word, kind of a feudal system like that existed in Europe in between the ancient times and modern history. And of course, most famous would be the various emperors of China that go back thousands of years as well. But don't worry, we're not going to memorize all those names. But the first thing I want to talk about is the early history of China. And this goes back to 2000 BC. So, like I said, thousands of years. And typically, when we look at the different groups that would take over and install their own rulers and expand what is China, we refer to them as dynasties. So each of the ruling eras we refer to as dynasties, which either refers to a particular family or an actual group of people that ended up taking over. And during ancient times, they also developed quite a few different types of philosophies or ways of thinking that still influence China today. So I just want to briefly mention each of these with the most general type of definition. And the first one would be Confucianism, which is spelled Confucianism. That's Confucianism. And Confucianism concentrates on tradition and compassion. Tradition and compassion. So, tradition, you're probably familiar with even some movies that are made about ancient Chinese stories about the importance of ancestors and family and those kinds of things. So, tradition and also compassion. Taoism, which is spelled Taoism. Taoism. This concentrates on being humble and religious. Humble and religious. The next one is legalism, and that's pretty much the way you would expect it to be spelled. Legalism. That's Legalism. And the English version of this, legalism, is also pretty self explanatory. It's about having strict laws, mostly to prevent people from being bad. And the last one kind of goes against the grain with the rest of these. Mohism, which is spelled Mohism, Mohism, which focuses on love and equality. Love and equality. So these are all major types of philosophy that developed in China a long time ago, while in Europe, during this period of time, you had things like Athens and Rome. So we often just think of the development of civilization going on in Europe, but it was actually happening in East Asia as well. So now the painful expansion. Empires tended to concentrate power. Empires tended to concentrate power. So each one of those new dynasties that came along, they attempted to concentrate power in one single place. So they tried to put down dissension, people that disagreed, especially if they were from a different ethnic group. And so throughout Chinese history, you will find evidence that they had fought lots of people that still exist today. Mongolians, Koreans, and Vietnamese. And that was one of the reasons why, relating this to the United States, we were scared, of course, that the Vietnamese, because they were communists, they were just some kind of colony or extension of China. But actually, that wasn't true. The Vietnamese, even the ones that we fought in the 1960s and 70s, they hated China a lot. They did not want China to dominate them. The only one of these people that got the best of the Chinese would be the Mongolians. The Mongolians are the only ones that managed to, at one point or another, conquer China. There you can see on the screen an ancient map of the Mongolian Empire and all of their spheres of influence, including in China. And right up here is where modern day Mongolia exists, but the whole way down into India, which we'll talk about later, over into where Iran and Iraq are today, as far as Western Russia. And so what the Mongolian Empire stretched pretty far. Does anybody know the name of the leader of the Mongolian Empire that got it its greatest expansion? Anybody know the name of the guy? His name is Genghis Khan. And he conquered most of this territory himself. But of course, that eventually fell apart. And China went back to ruling itself, once again going through phases of various dynasties. And by the time that Europe started to explore more of the world in the 1400s, China started to take a more isolationist approach. And this is a word that comes up in American history. A lot of countries at some point in their existence feel like isolating themselves. And China felt the same way too. It was a big nation with lots of people, and lots of natural resources, so they didn't really find it necessary to engage with the rest of the world. That was a problem, though, because Europeans took some of their inventions, like modern navigation equipment and gunpowder, and used that to expand their own empires, while China kind of just was complacent with what they had. Now, that wouldn't be a problem at first, but obviously, as the Europeans expanded more and more, they're eventually going to come in contact with China again. And that started to happen in the 19th century or 1800s. So in the 1800s, European powers and the United States both wanted trade with China, but in order to do so, they also wanted to dominate it. Now, of course, in order to trade with them, you also have to have something to offer. And China, like I said, already had a lot of their own natural resources. And so the British, in particular, offered them something that ended up greatly causing a Chinese decline, and that would be opium. So during the 1800s, the British, in order to trade with the Chinese, offered them opium as a form of payment. This would mean, of course, any typical problems we see with drug addiction. And the Chinese ruling class realized that this was happening, that their people were getting addicted to this drug, and so therefore the British in particular were going to be able to get as much resources out of China as they could. So China attempted to resist, but whenever this did happen, and there were multiple occurrences, the Europeans, even though each one of them was interested in getting what they individually could out of it, when China resisted, they often teamed up in order to stop China from resisting. So what did China have besides people willing to buy opium? They had things like paper, silk, cotton, porcelain, which is spelled Porcelain. Porcelain, Lain. Gunpowder, which I already mentioned, gunpowder. And so the question is, why did China keep having to rely on Europeans? Well, they did have a large navy, but it was stuck in the 1400s. It was mostly wooden ships. By the time the 1800s rolled around, Europeans had access to steam-powered engines, and then even further advanced beyond that, so they could travel without wind power. And while China did have a system of canals built throughout the country to make sure resources could get from different points, it was still incredibly inefficient. And they did have a big army, over 1 million people, but it was still based on the old feudal system and not very centralized or modern. The last royal family would be known as the Qing Dynasty, which is spelled Qing. Qing Dynasty. Qing. And they were in power from 1644 until 1911. So they oversaw most of this decline. Unfortunately, not only were they unable to deal with the Europeans or stop drugs from being pumped into the country, they also believed in order to stay in power, they needed to use brutal tactics against their own people. So that also did not make them popular. So the fact that there's all kinds of turmoil inside the country, there's the opium addiction, the population keeps expanding, which means that prices are going up because there's higher and higher demand for everything. As much as 1/3 of the adult population was addicted to drugs at one time. And so, because of all of this, eventually the old dynasty system